Hey, Code4Lib. Thanks for joining Jason and I earlier. Our session, we ran a little bit over and we didn't get to give a full and nice summary of the RACI charts that we had planned to discuss. So since we had to rush through that and there were a lot of comments in the Slack from those of you attending Code4Lib either in person in Buffalo or virtually like we are from wherever you are, I wanted to record just a short few minutes to give a little more time for the RACI charts. And I'm going to toss this up on our Law Library's YouTube, and I'll share this with you in Slack so that you can get a little bit more of this at your own convenience. So here we go. These are the slides that I rushed through that you didn't get to see. Should you race to RACI? Strategies and communication plans. And this section is the reason we had it at the end of our presentation. I'm sad that we didn't have more time to be able to dedicate to it, but we really wanted it to come after the other portions because the RACI chart really ties together all of the different things that we talked about, right? The number of people, their preferred communication styles, the preferred tools that might be best for certain audiences or certain types of projects. And so the RACI chart and the matrix that you'll see really works everything together. So what you really need to know about a RACI chart is what it does and what it needs. One really, really good tool that I like to sort of an acronym to use is the DANE: define, align, notify, and establish. If you can use this in developing a communications plan for internal communications among those people on your team or in your organization, it can really help you determine what's going to be the best tool for certain types of messaging. And this is not something that we have implemented across our library. There's a lot of these that are a little bit unspoken or some that we sort of take for granted, but this is something that we've actively talked about creating and documenting so that we have something more formal moving forward for our library. And I highly recommend it. And I'm really excited about being able to do this for our own organization. So using that and with that in mind, here's just an example matrix where you could put your format and tools across the top and your function and frequency down the side. So just as some examples, this is how I sort of anticipate that we would use this in our library, right? That if there's an emergency, but it's something that's not going to happen very often. Like let's say there's an emergency doctor's appointment. I myself just had an emergency dental thing, right? So what are the best ways for me to communicate that with people? That's generally going to be like a text or a phone call. Those are going to be things that come up not often, but when they do, we need to make sure we get in touch with someone quickly and it's the right person. It's a very direct message that we know they won't miss. What if there are just some like general questions? This might happen on a daily or even a weekly basis. There's a lot of places, a lot of sort of channels that would be good for that, right? We tend to use at UGA Law, we use Slack a lot, just like you all are using for Code4Lib. Sometimes though, people prefer email, and even, Zoom calls or regular phone calls could work for that. When you're thinking about meetings, our two main ones that we like to use, because we're still not doing a lot of face-to-face meetings, certainly not with groups of larger than a couple of people right now. So we're really sticking to Zoom for that. But for our small team, when you saw the example of our systems team of 3 people that I like so much that we used earlier in our session that was presented and recorded at Code4Lib, the phone, like a classic phone call that's just sort of a conference call, those can be really fun. They can be engaging. They can keep people from being too distracted because they're not looking at a computer screen. You can actually have those meetings. And it's been really popular for people to have like walking meetings that way too, right? So you can have multiple people on a regular phone call, but you could be walking and actually more engaging in the conversation and the brainstorming that could take place. Collaborating, we use Zoom for that a lot. I do really like that when you're on a Zoom call, even if it is just a small group of people, that you can screen share. And that's been really cool especially if we're working through like technical issues in our catalog or any other platform. And we really need to be able to see the details. Brainstorming and just chatting on a daily basis. We've been using our Slack channel for this most of the time. But then, you know, if it's a more of a personal matter, that'll fit more into that texting the person, as long as you're on that sort of term with them. All right. So this video link, I'm going to actually post a link to this underneath and in the description of the video segment. And I also shared this in the Code4Lib Slack channel for the conference channel. So if you need to get to this this little link, you can also just Google it. There's a lot of great short summaries of what a RACI matrix actually is. So if you're totally new to this concept, I really encourage you to check out one of those short videos to get more of an understanding than what I'm going to cover here. But for the basics, what does RACI stand for? This is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So again, going back to using examples from our own library, we're very lucky to have a smaller library, but even so, sometimes it can be a little complicated, especially depending on the project and how long a project might stretch out. So for this example, more often than not, on some of our systems teams tasks, I take the level of responsible. My supervisor, Wendy Moore, is generally the accountable. And then consulted, Jason, who is my co-presenter today, most of the time he is on the consulted level. And then lastly, informed, our IT director and our library director for almost all library systems projects or any sort of like decision making involved. Those are going to be the two people who are generally informed. They don't need to be held at a task level update. They don't need to even be consulted when we're making decisions that are very much about the project itself. But when it gets to higher level and things are getting accomplished, those are the sorts of things that Jim and TJ would need to be informed about. So you just want to think about who is doing what at sort of what level and what types of tasks, and then what are the best platforms for making that happen. So again, using our example, I really prefer Trello, and this was maybe one of the last segments that I was able to talk about during Code4Lib right before our session ended. I was really talking about how much I love Trello. It is a fantastic board. If you're not familiar with that, at the end of this, before I close out the recording, I'll actually also screen share what our Open Athens project, which is sort of a multi-year project where we're migrating all of our electronic resources from a WAM proxy in our ILS to a single sign-on with Open Athens as the authentication platform. So migrating all of that, I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of electronic resource links that live in catalog records, they live in our LibGuides, they live all over the place, right? And so whether it's a collection level item like a database link to get to their main homepage, or it's item level, we're talking like titles of ebooks, for example, every single link needs to be changed. Those are very tiny tasks that are numerous, and they have stretched over a couple of years now, and the work still continues. So that level of responsibility, that's where I'm being responsible for it. And to keep track of that, especially for a project where I'm kind of coming in and out, I may spend a lot of deep work on it, but then I may pull back and have to do many other things before I return to that work. And it's so detail oriented that Trello has been a fantastic place to keep the relevant documentation, have checklists for cards where I can actually check off the progress of how many links I've changed, what date, where I left off and need to pick up again, and all that sort of information. I also love that Trello has a great integration for linking out to Google Drive, because Google Sheets is another fantastic resource that we have used for that particular project, where I can actually keep batches of links and attach spreadsheets and all sorts of things. So that is why it is my preferred one, and I highly recommend anyone else on a major project, if you are the responsible in your RACI chart, check out what Trello can do for you, give it a shot. Accountable. when I, the responsible, really need to ask a quick question of the person who's accountable on this, Wendy, as our AD for collection services, she handles a lot of the relations with our vendors. So if I'm having an issue making a link work and I'm getting errors and I'm unable to really get it tested very well, and something just isn't working, I usually go to Wendy. And sometimes that I need like a quicker response because I'm in the middle of the project. And I'll generally use our Slack channel. We have a channel on our workspace for our systems team that just includes me, Wendy, and Jason, so we can actually do those quick questions back and forth. For consulted, and a good example for this is for this particular project with our big Open Athens migration of resources, Jason has largely taken on the role of testing the links. So after I've got something working and I know that it's correct and it's active and everything is in place through Wendy, I generally will send an email to Jason, and that's going to have a list of several links that are ready to test. And that email is not as urgent. It's not time sensitive. It just needs to be tested when he's able to get to it. And so email is a really great way to handle that. And then lastly, for informed, when we reach a pretty big milestone, let's say we've migrated an entire several hundred links for a particular resource, particular database. That's the sort of thing that we would bring up and give that notification to the informed, which would be our library director. Usually that's in the context of a larger meeting with all the librarians, or our IT director if we're having a larger sort of systems meeting where we've brought him in just to keep him up to date. And those are taking place in Zoom still. So here we're looking at another matrix. Generally, when you're actually charting out your RACI, you've got the roles and the people across the top, and on the side, you've got your tasks and functions. And so you are literally going to take the R, A, C, or I and plot it across this matrix. And the goal here is a visual one. I'm a very visual learner, and I think that is why the RACI charts work really well for me, because I like to be able to see sort of the workload. So the way this works is you can very easily see if one person is doing way too much than another person. You would see tons of R's down the side for that one role. And so the idea is that you can be more efficient and people will not get too overloaded if you plot this out and you can visually move the pieces around to make sure that no one is doing too many of a certain type of task or a certain type of function. And that way the roles and the workload are more equally shared by all. So here is a filled in example of the RACI chart for the Open Athens transition long-term project that I've been talking about here. You'll see that this includes most of the members of our systems team. We've got myself, my supervisor, Wendy, my colleague, Jason, who you met earlier. Jim is our IT director, who's very much that sort of liaison between the library and the law school's IT department. And then TJ, our law library director. Now, it makes sense that the two of them have more of the informed role because they are outside of the team. They're not doing the tasks. They do need to be kept informed, though. And depending on the type of task, the level of information or consultation that they need is going to be different. And then over here, we've also got a lot of the responsible is on me for the certain types of tasks, and that's related to my role in the library as the metadata librarian. And then, as I was explaining, my supervisor, Wendy, managing all the vendor relations, acquisitions, and that sort of thing, it makes sense that most of her role is in the accountable section, because she's going to sort of be a go-between in this particular task, where if there's something that isn't working and it just can't be accomplished by the responsible person, the accountable person, it sort of moves up to the next step. And that's the level where she could check back and forth with the vendor on some of these issues. And then, like I said, consulted. Generally, Jason is a big consulted, but there's also some things in here where he's going to be responsible. So when it comes to those testing of the resources, that's going to move over to Jason to do that sort of final testing to make sure it's working before our users start accessing it. All right, that sort of wraps it up. What I am going to do at this time is I am going to switch screen sharing. And I'm now going to screen share the Trello board just to give you a sense of what that looks like, since I promised I would share what it actually looks like in real life. So as I was talking about, the reason I love Trello, especially as a person who is the responsible person for the task level of this particular project, this is the project board. You can see up here, we've got myself, my supervisor, Wendy, and my colleague, Jason. All three of us are on the board, have access to it at all times, can get in and find something if we need to, and can access it from anywhere. Then we've also got, like I said, using it kind of as a soft intranet for the duration of this project. There are things that we have saved dating back to December of 2020. And that is where we first started to pull in relevant documentation, training materials, all those sorts of things. And we've got those under our forget-me-nots section on the far left column. And the idea of the Trello board is that items are going to move across the board as they were completed. So the items on the far left over here are things that are going to stay on the board forever, so that we always know where to find them. An example of this is to click and you can actually see items that are important. We've also got a list of resources here. And this is what I was talking about, where it works really well with Google Drive and other apps. You can actually link out to items. And so you can see here an example of the progress of some of these links for certain resources, where we can keep notes and just in general keep track of when things are transitioned to the new authentication platform, if it's working, if it isn't, if it's been tested, and which platforms we have actually made the final Athonized link transition on. And then as you cross over, the way we've set this particular project up is that we've got some basic linking and testing here, but when items are completed, we'll be changing them in our LibGuides, and then we move on to the catalog records. There's usually more catalog items than there are links to those collection level resources in our A to Z list. And then finally, we get all the way over to resources are working, we've tested it, everything's good. And when items are moved to the very, very end of the board, that means that those resources are completed and we can remove them from the board and archive them. Well, thanks again, especially to those who requested a little more information on the RACI charts. I'm really glad you enjoyed our session. I regret we didn't have more time to cover this, but I hope that you enjoyed this short video. Feel free to continue asking me questions and engaging with me on the Slack throughout the duration of Code4Lib. And I hope everyone has a fantastic conference.